Imagine attaining fame, wealth, and global recognition, only to be overwhelmed by an existential crisis that shakes the very foundation of your beliefs. This was the predicament of Leo Tolstoy, one of history's greatest literary minds. After reaching the pinnacle of success with monumental works like War and Peace and Anna Karenina, Tolstoy embarked on a profound journey in search of the true meaning of life. But what if I told you that he believed he had found the answer? In this video, we'll delve into how Tolstoy confronted his doubts, the philosophical revelations he arrived at, and how this can reshape the way you perceive your own existence. Before we dive deeper, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel, because this is a topic that will make you reflect on life in ways you never expected. Tolstoy's existential void and his philosophical crisis. Leo Tolstoy, born in 1828 into an aristocratic Russian family, was privileged with the best education and emerged as a brilliant intellectual from an early age. Yet his youth was marked by excess and indulgence, habits he would later regret deeply. This restlessness indicated that Tolstoy wasn't just a gifted writer, but a man tormented by profound unanswered questions. Over the years, he achieved worldwide fame with literary masterpieces such as War and Peace and Anna Karenina. His genius was undisputed, and his wealth afforded him a life of luxury and recognition. But behind this veneer of success, Tolstoy was haunted by a growing emptiness. Fame and wealth didn't fill the void within him. At one point, he began to recognize a fundamental flaw in all his worldly achievements: their impermanence. The realization that one day everything he had built would fade into oblivion terrified him. Tolstoy even confessed that life became unbearable when confronted with its fleeting nature. This realization sparked a profound question within him. What's the point of all of this? If nothing we do holds eternal value, why do we strive? Why do we labor, suffer, love, if it all ends with death? These existential questions gnawed at him, to the point where he could no longer silence them. What devastated him the most was that his search for meaning through reason and logic had come to an impasse. He sought answers in science, philosophy, and art, yet none offered the solace he sought. Reason had led him to a sobering conclusion: that life was but a transient phenomenon, and in the grand scheme of things, nothing truly mattered. This realization plunged him into a deep existential crisis. Tolstoy described this crisis as a black hole that consumed every ounce of joy and purpose in life. He saw no value in writing, no purpose in caring for his family, and no reason to continue living. In his journals, he wrote that the only certainty he could grasp was that of death, and this certainty made life feel unbearable. The idea of suicide loomed over him, and he confessed to hiding ropes and weapons from himself in an effort to prevent an impulsive act. The overwhelming anguish of living without answers made death seem like a possible escape. Yet something within him held him back from taking that final step. Instead of succumbing to despair, Tolstoy chose to delve even deeper into his search. A new perspective: faith over reason. If science and reason had failed to offer any resolution, perhaps the answer lay elsewhere. But where? Tolstoy began to observe his life more closely, and noticed that, despite his own crisis, there were people around him who appeared to find meaning in their existence. He turned his attention to ordinary people, especially the peasants and humble workers. Many of them lived in harsh conditions, faced constant hardships, and lacked formal education. Yet they seemed to possess something he lacked: an inner peace, a simple acceptance of life that Tolstoy deeply envied. What did these people know that he didn't? How could they go about their lives without drowning in existential turmoil? The answer, it seemed, lay in their unwavering faith. While Tolstoy was ensnared in his philosophical doubts, the peasants placed their trust in something far greater than themselves. This realization sparked a new curiosity in him. Could religion hold the answers he sought? This moment marked a turning point. For the first time, Tolstoy began to consider that the meaning of life might lie beyond the grasp of reason and logic. Perhaps the mistake was in trying to uncover absolute truth within the limits of the human mind. This shift set the stage for a new phase in his philosophical journey. However, this transition was not an easy one. Tolstoy was by nature a deeply rational and skeptical man, and embracing a truth that couldn't be explained by reason was no small challenge. He began studying various world religions, hoping to find a common thread that united them all in a single, fundamental truth. He explored the Gospels, Hindu scriptures, and Eastern philosophies, finding striking similarities among them. All of these traditions spoke of a truth greater than the individual, a meaning that transcended material existence. But Tolstoy still hesitated. He couldn't simply accept something driven by emotional necessity. He wanted real proof that there was a purpose in existence. Tolstoy's crisis deepened further at this point. He felt torn between two conflicting worlds, the world of reason and the world of faith. He grasped the logical arguments that denied any absolute meaning to life, but at the same time, something deep inside him yearned for a greater purpose. The internal tug-of-war between these two forces became more intense with every passing moment. This internal struggle pushed him into a profound dilemma. Either he would accept that life was devoid of meaning and sink into despair, or he would find a new way to perceive the world, one that would allow him to move forward. It was a choice between nihilism and faith, between void and hope. It was in this moment that Tolstoy made a radical decision. He would abandon his previous beliefs and devote himself entirely to the search for new meaning. Mere intellectual study of religions was not enough. He needed to live them. This marked the turning point in Tolstoy's life, when he decided to transform himself completely. He began to question not just his beliefs, but also his lifestyle, his values, and his priorities. He was now determined to take the first decisive step toward discovering the true meaning of life. But even then, his journey was far from over. What did Tolstoy uncover in his search? What conclusions did he arrive at? And perhaps most importantly, what can we learn from this profound transformation? These are the questions we'll explore in the next section. The search for answers. Science, religion, and philosophy. After realizing the emptiness that had engulfed his life, Tolstoy embarked on a tireless quest for answers. He couldn't simply accept life as it appeared. He needed to uncover a true meaning for his existence. In his pursuit, he turned to three main avenues: science, religion, and philosophy. Initially, Tolstoy placed his faith in science, hoping that it would provide a logical explanation for the meaning of life. He immersed himself in the study of biology, physics, and astronomy, seeking any sign of a greater purpose in the universe. Yet science only deepened his anguish. While it revealed how things functioned, it left the question of why unanswered. Biology explained the processes of evolution, but it failed to address the purpose of human existence. Astronomy unveiled a vast, indifferent cosmos where human life seemed insignificant. Tolstoy came to understand that, while science could explain the mechanics of nature, it was powerless to answer the most profound questions of the human soul. He noted that scientists could tell him how a tree grew, but not why it existed. This realization pushed him to look elsewhere for answers. The second path he explored was philosophy. He delved into the works of the great thinkers, from ancient Greek philosophers like Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, to modern minds like Kant, Schopenhauer, and Nietzsche. While he found many brilliant reflections, none provided the definitive answers he sought. Some philosophers argued that life had a purpose, while others insisted it was all meaningless. The sheer variety of answers only added to his confusion. How could so many great minds offer such vastly different views on the same question? Tolstoy soon realized that, while philosophy was intellectually stimulating, it often got lost in abstract ideas that failed to offer a tangible solution to the human dilemma. What he longed for wasn't an intellectual exercise. He craved something that could truly transform his life. That's when he turned to his third path: religion. Despite being raised in the Russian Orthodox Christian tradition, Tolstoy had never taken religion seriously. But now, in the depths of his existential crisis, he decided to study it with fresh eyes. He began with the Gospels, seeking to understand the message of Jesus Christ free from the influence of the church. What stood out to him most was the emphasis on love, compassion, and the renunciation of material possessions. He saw in these teachings a possible solution to his anguish. Perhaps the meaning of life was not to be found in reason or knowledge, but in acts of goodness and human connection. However, Tolstoy didn't restrict himself to Christianity. He expanded his search to other religions, studying Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam, and even Taoism. In all of these traditions, he found a common thread: the idea that human beings must transcend their ego and live in harmony with something greater than themselves. He was particularly drawn to the teachings of Buddhism and Indian philosophy. The notion that suffering arises from attachment and that true peace lies in the renunciation of desire resonated deeply with him. Tolstoy began to realize that perhaps he had been searching for happiness in all the wrong places. With each new revelation, his entire worldview started to shift. It dawned on him that his existential crisis wasn't rooted in the absence of answers, but in the very way he was approaching life itself. In his pursuit of meaning through material success and cold rationality, he started to suspect that the real answer might be hidden in simplicity and spirituality. Yet even with this insight, doubts lingered. Could a life built on such values truly work in the modern world? He observed that religious people seemed to draw strength from their faith, but he wondered, was this comfort genuine or merely a comforting illusion? He craved certainty, a truth that could be proven, not just believed. So Tolstoy conducted an experiment. He began applying spiritual teachings to his own life. He simplified his existence, renounced many of his aristocratic privileges, and poured himself into acts of charity and service. To his amazement, the change was immediate and profound. For the first time in years, his heart felt still, at peace. He realized that true happiness didn't come from wealth, fame, or intellectual accomplishment. It came from connection with others, with nature, with something greater. It came from living in alignment with spiritual principles. But this inner transformation didn't come without resistance. His family and peers couldn't understand why one of Russia's greatest literary minds would choose to distance himself from the elite and move toward the life of a peasant. Some called him insane. Others saw him as a traitor to his class. Tolstoy didn't flinch. He knew in his soul that he had found the right path. The search was far from over, but now he had direction. His question was no longer just theoretical or abstract. It had become deeply personal and practical. How do you take this understanding and build a meaningful life from it? In the following sections, we'll explore how Tolstoy arrived at his final answer and how it forever changed his way of living and writing. The discovery of the meaning of life. According to Tolstoy, Tolstoy spent years in search of truth, exploring science, philosophy, and religion. But in the end, the great revelation didn't come from scholarly books or intellectual theories. It emerged from a simple place, observing the lives of ordinary people. He noticed that peasants, living in far harsher conditions than he ever had, seemed to carry a peace within that he had never known. They labored hard, owned little, faced constant struggle, and yet they smiled, laughed, and found purpose in their lives. Tolstoy began to see a pattern. These people did not chase happiness in achievements or recognition. Instead, they found meaning in faith, in honest work, and in their relationships with others. Unlike the intellectual elite, who were often consumed by existential doubt, the peasants accepted life for what it was and gave themselves fully to serving others. It was then that the pieces began to fall into place. The true meaning of life, Tolstoy realized, was not in prestige or knowledge. It was in love, in compassion, and in service. This insight shattered his former worldview and built something entirely new in its place. He started to reject the belief that individual success was the path to fulfillment. Instead, he came to see life's deepest purpose as living for others and connecting to something larger than oneself. He developed a personal philosophy grounded in simplicity, humility, and service. Tolstoy came to believe that love was the only force powerful enough to give life real meaning. Any life centered solely on the self, he felt, was destined to end in emptiness. For him, the answer to life's most pressing question, what is the meaning of life, was both simple and profound. The meaning of life is to love and to serve. This was the only way, he believed, to escape existential despair and find lasting peace. But this wasn't just a beautiful idea. Tolstoy committed to living it. He gave up his aristocratic privileges, embraced a humble life of manual labor, and aligned his actions with his beliefs. His version of Christianity wasn't about blind faith. It was about embodying love and nonviolence in daily life. This new vision led him to admire spiritual leaders like Jesus, Buddha, and even Gandhi, who in time would be profoundly influenced by Tolstoy's writings. He saw in all of them a shared truth. They lived to serve and to elevate the world around them. His conviction also led him to criticize traditional religious institutions. He saw the Russian Orthodox Church as a political body that had strayed far from the teachings of Jesus. This dissent cost him dearly. He was excommunicated and targeted for his beliefs. But Tolstoy didn't waver. He had found a truth that reached beyond dogma and convention, and he was ready to follow it no matter the cost. This awakening also transformed his writing. His later works began to reflect his newfound philosophy, celebrating simplicity, compassion, and the pursuit of life's true purpose. Masterpieces like The Death of Ivan Ilyich and Resurrection stand as testaments to this inner shift. They aren't just stories, they're declarations of a soul reborn. At the end of his journey, Tolstoy came to a profound realization. The question about the meaning of life could never be answered with words or theories alone. It had to be lived. The answer wasn't in the mind, but in the heart, and in the quiet, consistent acts of daily life. He understood that as long as we search for meaning in reason or personal accomplishments, we're bound to fall into emptiness. But when we root meaning in love and in giving to others, life becomes full, real. This discovery didn't erase all his inner turmoil. Tolstoy still wrestled with doubts and moments of unease. But now he understood something deeper, that the meaning of life wasn't something to be found, but something to be created, day by day through our choices and our attitude. This shift in perspective changed everything. It transformed Tolstoy into one of the most influential minds of the 19th century. His philosophy touched millions, and his legacy still speaks to us today. In the next part, we'll explore how this inner transformation shaped his outer life, and what we can take from it to apply on our own journey. How did this vision influence his life and writings? After this awakening, Tolstoy knew he couldn't keep living as he had before. His new philosophy demanded a radical transformation, and he was ready to pay the price. The first change came in how he viewed wealth and the aristocracy. For most of his life, Tolstoy lived like a nobleman, surrounded by luxury and ease, but now he saw these privileges as walls that separated him from a meaningful life. Inspired by the peasants he deeply respected, he gave up much of his wealth. He began dressing simply, working the land, and living humbly, closer to the people. His decision shocked many of his friends and relatives. They couldn't understand why he would reject a life of comfort. But for Tolstoy, this was the only way to live truthfully according to his beliefs. This new way of living also brought tension into his home. His wife, Sophia, struggled to accept his choices, especially with many children to care for. The growing conflict between them deepened, turning into a painful rift that would shadow his final years. But Tolstoy's transformation didn't stop at lifestyle. It changed his writing too, deeply and permanently. Where once he wrote sweeping novels about aristocrats and war, now his focus turned to the spiritual, the moral, the human soul. One of the first signs of this shift was the death of Ivan Ilyich, a haunting story about a man who, facing death, realizes that he lived a hollow life obsessed with status and appearances, never truly touching the essence of life. Another powerful example is Resurrection, where Tolstoy exposes the deep hypocrisy of Russian society and pleads for a life rooted in compassion and inner truth. The book was so critical of the church and state that it led to his excommunication from the Russian Orthodox Church. Alongside his fiction, he began writing philosophical and spiritual essays. In works like Confession and The Kingdom of God is Within You, Tolstoy outlined his vision of a pure Christianity, free from institutional power, centered solely on love, simplicity, and nonviolence, just as Jesus taught. His ideas lit a spark across the world. Among those inspired was Mahatma Gandhi, who even corresponded with Tolstoy and credited him as a key influence behind his philosophy of nonviolent resistance, one that helped lead India to independence. Tolstoy, too, became a fierce critic of violence and war. He rejected the use of force in any form, calling for pacifism and peaceful rebellion as the only true way to change the world. Of course, these beliefs didn't sit well with the Russian authorities. The government viewed him as a threat. His works were censored, and he was placed under constant surveillance by the Tsar's secret police. Still, Tolstoy never backed down. He kept preaching simplicity, love for others, and a deep resistance to the powers that crush the poor and powerless. As the years passed, the pressure mounted. He felt more and more suffocated by society, by his fame, and by the conflicts at home. His already strained marriage had reached a breaking point. He felt he could no longer live authentically in that environment. So in 1910, at the age of 82, Tolstoy made one final, bold choice. He left his home quietly and set out on a journey with no clear destination, just the hope of finding peace. But his body, worn by age and illness, couldn't follow where his spirit longed to go. He fell gravely ill during the trip and died at a remote train station in Ostapovo, in a small, humble room, surrounded not by luxury, but by a handful of friends and followers. His death marked more than the end of a life. It was the closing chapter of a remarkable journey. He left the world as he had always wanted to live, simply, honestly, and at peace with himself. Tolstoy's impact didn't end with literature. His philosophy continues to guide those who seek something deeper. He showed us that no matter where we come from, we all have the power to search for truth and live it. His final years were marked by struggle, yes, but also by an unwavering sense of purpose. He found the truth that so many spend a lifetime chasing, and he lived and died by it. Now that we've seen how Tolstoy applied his discovery to his own life, let's reflect on what we can learn from him and how his ideas can illuminate our own journey. What can we learn from Tolstoy today? Tolstoy's legacy reaches far beyond literature. His reflections on the meaning of life remain deeply relevant, especially today, in a world where many still face the same existential crises he once did. So what lessons can we take from Tolstoy's journey? The first profound lesson is this: external success does not guarantee internal peace. Tolstoy had everything: fame, fortune, recognition, a loving family. Yet he felt a deep, haunting emptiness. His experience reminds us that material achievements can bring comfort, but not necessarily purpose. Another striking insight is that seeking meaning purely through reason can be a dead end. Tolstoy turned to science and philosophy for answers, only to find that while they explain how the world works, they do not tell us why we are here. Even today, many still believe reason alone holds the key, yet Tolstoy's journey suggests otherwise. He also realized that meaning is not something we discover, but something we live. Instead of waiting for a grand revelation, he began to build purpose through his everyday actions. That's a powerful reminder. Meaning can be found when we focus on what truly matters, right here, right now. Tolstoy also emphasized the importance of love and compassion. He saw that living only for oneself leads to emptiness, while living for others brings fulfillment. In a world obsessed with individualism, this truth shines even brighter. Helping, serving, connecting. That's where real purpose lies. Simplicity was another pillar of his philosophy. Tolstoy came to see that the endless pursuit of wealth, status, and possessions was an illusion. True peace, he found, lies in a simpler, more authentic life. In our consumer-driven culture, this message is more relevant than ever. He also challenged the status quo. Tolstoy dared to question traditions and institutions, the Orthodox Church, the aristocracy, the government, believing many were more interested in power than truth. His courage invites us to look critically at the systems we follow. Do they reflect the values we hold dear? Another essential insight: real knowledge comes from lived experience, not just theory. Tolstoy didn't just think or write, he tested his beliefs in the real world. That's our cue. Don't just read about life's meaning, live it, test it, feel it. A core part of Tolstoy's vision was nonviolence. He believed the world is transformed not through force, but through peace and love. His influence reached far, most notably inspiring Gandhi and the nonviolence movement. His ideas still ripple across the world today. And perhaps one of the most hopeful lessons Tolstoy gives us is this: it's never too late to change. Even at the height of his fame, he was brave enough to question everything and start anew. No matter where you are in life, it's never too late to realign with your truth. Lastly, Tolstoy reminds us that the search for meaning is a lifelong journey. He never stopped questioning, evolving, or seeking. There's no final answer, only a path of continual growth and discovery. If we truly apply these lessons, we might find ourselves living with deeper purpose, clarity, and peace. What Tolstoy discovered wasn't just an answer to his own crisis, it was a timeless philosophy that still speaks to our hearts today. The final question that remains, and you, how have you been searching for meaning in your life? Tolstoy's legacy. The meaning of life is in our choices. Leo Tolstoy was far more than a literary genius. He was a man courageous enough to challenge everything and seek a life of deeper truth. His story reminds us that the meaning of life isn't found in wealth, fame, or power, but in love, compassion, and service to others. He showed us that the question, what is the meaning of life, doesn't have a single answer. It's a path of personal discovery. Tolstoy found his truth by shedding ego and choosing a simpler, more honest way of living. And perhaps that's the greatest lesson. The purpose of life isn't something we find. It's something we build every day through our choices. Now we'd love to hear from you. Which of Tolstoy's lessons resonated with you the most? Have you ever asked yourself what the true meaning of life is? Leave your thoughts in the comments and share your perspective. If this video made you reflect, drop a like, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you don't miss the next video in our series on great minds in history. Share this with someone who needs to hear this message. See you in the next video.